I'm Josh Ryan, licensed professional counselor, and this is Pause and Respond, the framework for emotional control, disciplined thinking, and better decisions under pressure. Have you ever heard yourself say, "I'm sorry," and almost immediately thought, "Wait, what am I apologizing for?" Someone's mood changed. "I'm sorry." Someone misunderstood you. "I'm sorry." Someone seemed disappointed, and yet you say, "I'm sorry." Someone became quiet, and before you even understood what happened, you were already taking responsibility. No accusation, no evidence, no clear mistake, just tension in that moment. And somehow, the apology arrived before the truth did. Maybe you've noticed it in similar moments too. "Sorry to bother you." "Sorry for asking." "Sorry I need help." "Sorry I'm emotional." "Sorry I disagree." Eventually, "I'm sorry" stops being something you say because you caused harm. It becomes something you say because your presence created discomfort. And those are not the same thing. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we go forward. Apologies matter. A sincere apology is one of the most powerful things we can offer another human being. It says, "I see what I did, I understand how it affected you, and I'm willing to own what belongs to me." That's humility. That's accountability and emotional maturity. We need more of those apologies. But that's not the apology we're talking about today. We're talking about the apology that happens before responsibility has even been established. The apology that isn't really saying, "I recognized I caused harm," but saying something much quieter. "Something feels wrong between us, and I need it to stop." Well, that's an important distinction. Sometimes, "I'm sorry" isn't actually an apology. It's simply appeasement. An apology says, "I recognize my responsibility." Appeasement says, "I need this tension to go away." They can sound exactly the same, but emotionally, they come from completely different places. One comes from a position of accountability, the other, often anxiety. Now, I've seen this happen countless times in counseling. A client is describing a disagreement, their spouse became frustrated, their parent became quiet, their friends seemed distant, and almost immediately they say, "I know, it's my fault." So I'll ask, "What specifically did you do?" And then silence. Sometimes a long silence. Finally, they say, "I don't know." They're just upset. Now think about what just happened. Their emotion became evidence of your guilt. No investigation, no clarity, no understanding of what actually occurred. All we know is that someone was uncomfortable, so responsibility immediately moved toward you. I think there's a name for that experience: responsibility anxiety. Responsibility anxiety is the urge to locate yourself at the center of every problem, simply because being responsible can feel safer than being powerless. Your boss seems quiet. You think, "Did I do something?" Your spouse is stressed. Instantly the thought is this about me? A friend hasn't called recently, and the thoughts move to, "Did I upset them?" Or maybe your child is struggling, and your thoughts go to what you may have done wrong. Something feels off, and immediately you begin searching yourself for an explanation. Now here's the strange part. Self-blame can actually feel like control. Now think about that. If everything is my fault, then maybe everything is mine to fix. If I caused it, I can apologize. If I did something wrong, I'm able to change. If they're upset because of me, maybe I can make them okay again. But self-blame hurts. But uncertainty can feel even harder. Because sometimes someone is upset and you didn't cause it. Sometimes someone pulls away and you simply can't control it. Sometimes someone misunderstands you and an additional explanation isn't going to fix it. Sometimes the room just feels uncomfortable and there's absolutely nothing you're supposed to do. For someone who spent years trying to create emotional safety, that can be incredibly difficult to tolerate. Sometimes blaming yourself feels safer than accepting that not everything is in your control. Now that's worth sitting in for a second, because maybe the apology isn't always about guilt. Maybe sometimes it's about relief. Something feels wrong and you apologize. This makes the tension decrease. Your nervous system exhales, and without realizing it, you've learned something. Taking responsibility makes uncertainty go away. So the next time you're in a similar situation and tension appears, you do it again. And this sequence can happen incredibly fast. It goes something like this: tension, and then something feels different. Interpretation, the thought goes to something must be wrong. Responsibility, maybe it's me, and then an apology, I'm sorry. And this provides relief. The tension drops, and because the apology created relief, your nervous system remembers it. That's how a response slowly becomes a reflex. Now, some people learn this early. If apologizing ended conflict, you apologized. If accepting blame restored the peace, you accepted the blame. If being the easy one, the agreeable one, the person who quickly said, "It's okay, I'm sorry," made relationships feel safer, your nervous system paid attention. It worked. But something can work without being true. And that's the distinction we're beginning to uncover. Because there is a profound difference between feeling responsible and being responsible. A feeling of responsibility is information. It isn't the verdict. You may have done something wrong. You may owe an apology. You may need to move in and begin to repair. You may even need to listen more carefully. But you don't know that yet. And emotional maturity requires enough patience to find out. That's where I want to introduce another idea we'll carry through today's conversation. And that's accurate responsibility. Accurate responsibility doesn't mean avoiding accountability. It's quite the opposite. It means becoming precise about it. I will fully own what belongs to me. I will apologize when I've caused the harm. I will repair what I've damaged. I will listen when someone tells me I've hurt them. But I will not automatically collect responsibility simply because someone else is uncomfortable. In other words, own all of yours. Don't own more than yours. Now that's a completely different kind of accountability, because sometimes the emotionally mature response is, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And sometimes it's, I can see that you're upset. Help me understand what happened. Notice the difference. One assumes responsibility because responsibility is clear. The other remains curious until clarity arrives. Both statements are caring, but only one requires you to automatically become guilty. And here's something I hope you'll remember. Feeling guilty is not the same as being guilty. Feelings matter. They deserve attention. But feelings don't determine responsibility. That's what reflection is for. That's what curiosity is for. And most importantly, that's what the pause is for. The space between something feels wrong and the thought of this must be my fault. Because when we apologize for everything, something unexpected begins happening. Our apologies stop telling the truth. The real issue may never get discussed. The other person may never examine their part. We may quietly accumulate resentment, and relationships can become organized around one person always carrying the blame. And that's not accountability. That's just distortion. Maybe one of the freedoms we've been invited into isn't the freedom to stop saying I'm sorry. It's the freedom to stop apologizing before we know whether the apology is true. To stop apologizing for having needs, for asking questions, for respectfully disagreeing, for having limits, or even just existing in our own space. Those things may occasionally inconvenience someone. They may even disappoint someone. But inconvenience isn't the same thing as harm. Disappointment isn't necessarily wrongdoing. Intention isn't automatic evidence that anybody's guilty. So the next time you feel the words "I'm sorry" rushing towards you, pause. Not because you shouldn't apologize, but because your apology deserves to be true. Ask yourself, what specifically am I taking responsibility for? Now, if you know the answer, own it fully. But if you don't, maybe you don't need to apologize yet. Maybe you need curiosity. Maybe you need a conversation. Or maybe you need enough emotional security to tolerate not knowing for another moment. Because freedom isn't learning to say I'm sorry. Freedom is learning to pause long enough to discover whether an apology is actually true. And that's the question we'll carry into part 2. Why can blaming ourselves feel safer than simply not knowing? Because I don't think we're afraid of accountability. I think many of us are afraid of uncertainty. And sometimes taking the blame is something uncertainty doesn't. And that's something to fix. Because having something to fix can feel strangely comforting, even when the thing you're fixing is yourself. That's where we left off. And I want to stay there for a moment. Because I think there's something underneath reflexive apologizing that we rarely talk about. Sometimes guilt feels safer than helplessness. Now think about that. Guilt hurts, but guilt gives you a job. Helplessness doesn't. If something feels wrong between you and another person, uncertainty leaves you with nowhere to go. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what they're feeling. You don't know whether their mood has anything to do with you. You don't know whether you should say something or simply give them space. And for a nervous system that spent years trying to anticipate emotional problems, the words "I don't know" can feel almost unbearable. So your mind reaches for an answer, and sometimes the fastest answer it comes to is "it must be me." That's painful. But at least pain gives you direction. If it's your fault, you can apologize, you can explain, change, try harder, fix something. Guilt says, do something. Helplessness says, there may be nothing you can do. And with someone who's learned to survive by fixing, guilt can actually feel safer than helplessness. That's a strange idea. We usually think people avoid guilt. And of course, most of us do. But familiar guilt can sometimes feel more tolerable than unfamiliar powerlessness, because guilt gives you control, or at least the feeling of control. And that's where I think many of us quietly make what I call the control bargain. The control bargain sounds like this: if I accept responsibility for what feels wrong, then maybe I can control what happens next. Now, it's an invisible trade. You accept blame in exchange for the feeling that you still have influence. If I caused this, I can fix it. If they're upset because of me, I can make them okay again. If this relationship feels distant because of something I did, I can do something to bring it back closer. And for a moment, self-blame reduces that uncertainty. But it does so at the cost of giving you responsibility that may have never belonged to you. That's the cost of the bargain. Because once taking responsibility becomes your way of regaining control, you begin finding yourself responsible everywhere. Someone's mood changes, maybe it's you. Someone becomes quiet, maybe it's you. Someone pulls away, someone makes a poor decision, maybe you should have prevented it. And eventually, you begin living inside a world where every emotional shift somehow points back to you. That's not accountability. That's anxiety trying to create control. And this is where I think we need to make another important distinction. Control is not the same thing as responsibility. Responsibility asks, what actually belongs to me? Control asks, what can I make belong to me so I don't have to feel powerless? Now, those questions can produce very different lives. Accurate responsibility is willing to discover the truth, even when the truth is, this isn't mine. And that's harder than it sounds, because if something isn't yours, you may not be able to fix it. You have to watch the struggle. You have to allow the other person to experience disappointment. You may have to sit beside someone else's anger without making their anger disappear. You may have to just accept that someone misunderstands you, and another explanation from you isn't going to change their mind. You may even have to watch someone make a decision that you strongly disagree with and recognize that the decision still belongs to them. That's where control begins to loosen its grip. I've noticed something over the years. Some of the most emotionally exhausted people I've met aren't people who avoid responsibility. They're people who take responsibility for things they were never given authority over. Let's think about that. Responsibility without authority is the ultimate recipe for anxiety. Now, you can influence your spouse, but you can't manage their inner world. You can guide your children, but you cannot guarantee their choices. You can lead people well, but you cannot guarantee they'll approve of your leadership. You can even communicate clearly, but you can't guarantee someone will understand exactly what you intended. The moment you accept responsibility for an outcome you don't actually have the authority to determine, the feeling of anxiety becomes almost inevitable. You were never meant to be responsible for outcomes that you don't have power to control. That's not permission to stop caring. It's permission to become accurate. And that's why I think one of the most emotionally mature sentences we can learn is only 4 words. Simply, I don't know yet. I don't rush past that, because for someone accustomed to solving emotional problems immediately, those 4 words can feel incredibly uncomfortable. I don't know why they're upset with me. I don't know whether this is even about me. I don't know whether I owe an apology or not. I don't know what the silence means. Simply, I just don't know yet. And that doesn't reflect indecision. That's emotional restraint. It's refusing to confess before you've investigated. It's allowing reality to arrive before anxiety writes the verdict. And that changes the sequence we talked about in part one. The old pattern was tension, interpretation, responsibility, apology, relief. But now we create another possibility. Now it goes from tension to pause, I don't know, gaining information, and then accurate responsibility. Understanding what part of this belongs to me. Now that's pause and respond happening in real time. And I've watched that small pause completely change conversations. Someone might say, my spouse barely talked to me last night. The old response may conclude that they're mad at me. Then an apology, the explaining, the fixing, the pause. But the pause asks, what do I actually know? Did they say they were angry? Did they say something happened between us? Do I know what kind of day they had? Suddenly, there's room for reality. Maybe they're stressed, worried, exhausted. Maybe something happened at work. Maybe they're simply just quiet. There are dozens of possibilities. But anxiety usually chooses one. The pause allows the other possibilities to exist. And when we stop automatically taking responsibility, something else becomes possible. Other people get the opportunity to take responsibility too, and that's important. Because healthy relationships don't need one person to carry all the blame. They need both people willing to carry their part. My responsibility doesn't erase yours, and your responsibility doesn't erase mine. Two things can be true at the same time. Maybe I shouldn't have raised my voice. I can own that. And maybe what you said was hurtful. Both can be true. Maybe I forgot something important. I can apologize. And maybe your reaction was disproportionate to what occurred. Both of those can be true. Maybe I need to communicate more clearly, and maybe you made assumptions instead of asking. Accurate responsibility doesn't require one person to become guilty enough for everyone else to finally feel comfortable. It asks everyone involved to tell the truth about their part. And that's what makes a sincere apology so powerful. Because when you stop apologizing from reflex, I'm sorry begins meaning something again. It isn't a nervous habit. It isn't a strategy for reducing tension. It isn't a way to control someone's reaction. It's a deliberate act of ownership. And it says, I understand what I did. I see how it affected you. I regret it, and I'm willing to repair what belongs to me. And that's an apology worth trusting. But there's another matter here, and I think that's where we're heading next. Because some people finally become accurate about their responsibility and still struggle enormously when they discover they actually were wrong. They move from everything is my fault to something that sounds like I made a mistake, and then immediately there must be something wrong with me. That's where responsibility quietly becomes shame. And those are not the same thing. Guilt can say, I did something wrong. Shame says there is something wrong with me. One can lead to repair, while the other often leads to collapse. And I think emotionally mature accountability requires learning how to experience the first without becoming consumed by the second. Because maybe the people who apologize most healthily aren't the people who feel the most guilt. Maybe they're the people who can look directly at what they did without turning what they did into who they are. They can say, I was wrong, without saying I'm worthless. They can say, I hurt you, without deciding they're a terrible person. They can repair without disappearing into shame. And that's where I want to go next. Not toward apologizing less, but toward apologizing better. Toward responsibility without shame. Toward the ability to say, when I'm wrong, I can own it without collapsing. And when I'm not responsible, I can let it go without guilt. That's accurate responsibility fully lived. Because the goal was never to escape accountability. The goal is finally to become free enough to tell the truth about what actually belongs to you. And telling the truth about what belongs to you also means being willing to face moments when something really does. Because sometimes, let's face it, you're wrong. Sometimes you said the thing. Sometimes your tone was hurtful. Sometimes you broke the promise that was made. Sometimes you made the assumption. Sometimes you may have reacted too quickly. Sometimes you simply hurt someone you love. And I don't want us to spend an entire episode talking about necessary guilt only to become afraid of necessary accountability. That's not freedom. Freedom is being secure enough to tell the truth either way. That's where the distinction we ended part 2 with becomes so important. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says there is something wrong with me. Those sentences may sound familiar, but emotionally, they take us in completely different directions. Healthy guilt can point us towards something. Pay attention. Maybe you moved away from your values. Maybe something does need repair. But shame does something different. Shame doesn't simply examine what happened. It begins examining your worth. Suddenly, I handled that poorly becomes I'm terrible at relationships. And I shouldn't have said that because I ruined everything. I hurt someone I love because I'm a horrible person. Right? The first one described behavior. The other begins to outline and define identity or perceived identity. And once the conversation turns to identity, repair becomes much more difficult. Because shame turns your attention inward instead of asking what the person needs from me. You begin asking, what does it say about me? Instead of listening, you defend. Instead of repairing, you begin to explain. Instead of staying present when someone's hurt, you collapse into your own. And suddenly, the person who was hurt is no longer the center of the conversation. Your shame is. Now, I've watched this happen in relationships. Someone finally says, what you did really hurt me. And within minutes, the person hearing it responds, I'm such a terrible person. I can't do anything right. I always ruin everything. Now something strange occurs. The person who was hurt starts comforting the person who hurt them. You're not terrible. That's not what I meant. You're a good person. The entire emotional burden shifts. The original hurt, or the context of the original conversation, has disappeared. And now the apology requires reassurance. That's not repair. That's shame taking over the room. And this is why self-compassion doesn't weaken accountability. It makes sustained accountability possible. Because if I can believe that I'm still worthy, even though I got something wrong, then I don't have to run from what I did. I can look at it, I can listen, I can tolerate the other person's disappointment, I can learn, I can repair. I don't have to protect myself from the truth. And I think that's one of the greatest signs of emotional maturity. Not believing you're rarely wrong, but being able to discover that you are wrong. without becoming emotionally destroyed by it. That's strength. I've watched some of the most powerful moments in counseling happen when someone finally learns to say, I was wrong, and then stops. No 10-minute explanation, no list of reasons, no, but you also, no collapse into, I'm just the worst person in the world, just, I was wrong. I understand how that affected you, and I'm sorry. What can I do to repair it? There's tremendous strength in that kind of apology, because it isn't asking the other person that you just hurt to take care of you. It's taking responsibility for taking care of what you damaged. And that brings us to another distinction I think matters. An apology is not the same thing as repair. An apology acknowledges the past, but repair changes what happens next. You can say I'm sorry 20 times and change nothing. Or you can offer one sincere apology, understand what happened, and begin behaving differently. Which one actually restores trust? If I apologize for interrupting you and continue to interrupt you, that's not repair. If I apologize for breaking a promise and continue making promises I can't keep, that's not repair. If I apologize for the way I speak when I'm angry, but never learned how to regulate myself, eventually the words I'm sorry begin to lose their meaning. Because accountability isn't measured by how badly you feel. It's measured by what you do next. It's measured by the action, not the feeling of sorrow. Here's the sentence I hope stays with you. You don't prove accountability by how long you punish yourself. You prove it by what you do differently in the future. It's action. It's action that restores the trust that may have been lost through the event that required the apology. And that's where guilt becomes useful. It points toward change and then allows you the freedom to move towards it. But shame wants something different. Shame wants you to stay, to replay, to suffer, to keep proving that you understand how terrible the mistake was by refusing to forgive yourself for making it. But that suffering, it's not repair. The only thing that repair is changed behavior. And that's why I want to give you a very simple way to practice accurate responsibility. 3 questions, not 20, just 3. What happened? What's mine? What now? Now, what happened begins with start with reality, not fear, not interpretation, not the worst possible version of yourself, but what actually happened. What did you say, do? What was the impact? Stay with the facts. Then, what's mine? This is where you become honest. Maybe all of it belongs to you. Own it. Maybe part of it belongs to you. Maybe none of it belongs to you. And if that's the case, don't manufacture guilt simply because someone else is uncomfortable. Remember, own all of yours, but don't own more than yours. And finally, now what? This is repair. What needs to change? What conversation needs to happen? What promise needs to be upheld? What behavior needs to become different? What can you do? Not to erase the past, but to honor what you've learned from it. Now that's where accountability begins showing up as growth. Imagine what this might look like in an ordinary relationship. You walk in the house, your spouse is unusually quiet. The old pattern immediately says, what did I do? You feel the apology forming, but this time you pause. And you think, what happened? All you actually know is that they're quiet. So instead of putting yourself on trial, you simply say, you seem quiet tonight. Everything okay? And then wait. No panic, no premature apology, no internal courtroom, just curiosity. But imagine another evening. You walk into the house and your spouse tells you, The way you spoke to me this morning really hurt. This time, something does belong to you. You remembered it. You know they're right. So you don't defend it. You don't collapse. You don't make them convince you that you're still a good person. You just say you're right. I was frustrated. I spoke to you disrespectfully. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. And then you change the behavior. That's accurate responsibility. When it isn't yours, you don't collect. When it is yours, you don't run. Now imagine how much freedom exists between those two moments. No constant self-investigation, no apology simply because someone is quiet, no pretending that you're never wrong. Just truth, responsibility, repair, and growth. That equals freedom. And maybe that's what emotional security really looks like. Not becoming someone who never makes mistakes, but becoming someone who trusts themselves to face a mistake when it occurs. Someone who can say, I did something wrong, without concluding, there is something fundamentally wrong with me. Someone who can repair without disappearing. And after you've repaired, there's one more part. You have to let yourself move forward. And that's difficult for people who have guilt as proof of accountability. Sometimes they think, if I stop feeling bad, maybe that means I don't care. That's not true. You don't have to continue in the suffering. To prove you learned, accountability has an ending. Shame doesn't. Accountability says learn. Shame says suffer. Accountability asks, what will you do differently? Shame keeps asking, how could I have done that? One moves you toward growth, the other keeps you change. To the person you were in the worst moment. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to repair. You are allowed to become wiser. And after you've genuinely done those things, you are allowed to move forward. That's not avoiding responsibility, that's completing it. So this week, before you automatically say I'm sorry, practice 3 questions. What happened, what's mine, and what now? And notice what changes. Maybe you discover you don't owe an apology at all. Maybe you discover you owe a very specific one. Either way, you'll be telling the truth. And that's what we're after. Not fewer apologies, truer apologies. Now, if today's episode stirred something in you, maybe a relationship where you've been carrying too much blame, or maybe a mistake you've already repaired but still haven't allowed yourself to move beyond, don't let this become another insight that disappears tomorrow. Take those 3 questions with you. Write them down. What happened, what's mine, and what now? And if you're ready to continue practicing these ideas beyond the podcast, visit pauseandrespond.com. That's where you'll find additional tools, articles, and resources designed to help you slow emotional reactions, understand what's happening underneath them, and build healthier responses in your relationships. Because insight can show you the pattern, but ultimately it's practice that changes it. And if someone came to mind while listening, someone who seeks to apologize simply for taking up space, share this episode with them. Not because they need to stop apologizing, but because they may need permission to let their apologies become honest again. So here's what I want to leave you with. Own all of yours. Don't own more than yours. And remember, you are responsible for your behavior. You are not required to become your worst behavior. Make the apology, make the repair, make the change, and then let yourself keep becoming. Because when you're wrong, you can own it without collapsing. When you're not responsible, you can let it go without feeling the guilt. And when you don't know yet, simply wait without inventing blame. And those all lead to an accurate responsibility. Not less accountability, better accountability. Not fewer apologies, truer ones. I'm Josh Ryan. This is Pause and Respond. Less reaction, more choices.